The girl in the basement. However messy Jeanette's conflict with her mother gets as an adult, I find the story for her, Jeanette, well, it always starts here. The image of a girl in a zipper bag in the basement of their home in northern Missouri.
I was Googling missing girls, which I've done since I was in my 20s, looking for this girl that I don't know. And as I was Googling it, your story came in, and I went, I've never heard about this girl. And she looks like I did when I was younger. That's weird.
Shirley Jane Rose, the 9-year-old girl featured in The Toll Season 1, The Path Back Home. She was abducted and murdered in Springfield, Missouri in 1975. No one has been convicted for the crime.
It happened on my birthday. And so it just kind of drew me in, this October 17th thing. And that if I showed you a picture of me, it was just insanely similar.
Jeanette's father, at the center of her life-altering story, went unchecked, roaming off the beaten path and showing up at isolated farmhouses all across the Show Me State.
And the fact that it was in the area that he worked as a traveling salesman. So I was listening just like, oh my gosh, I wonder if this is the girl. But then I realized that wouldn't make a lot of sense, because why would he bring her back to our house? None of it made a lot of sense to me, but that's what made me search, because I'm on this, in fact, this quest. Like, I feel like my life is, I would love it if I could just work the next 20 years in finding missing children. That's like my passion at this point, but she's the one.
She's the one. So many secrets.
That is insane to just imagine that my father, that everybody else saw as this other person, would be even capable of these things, yet I know what went on in our house.
It takes a while for me to get the courage to ask, what exactly happened in your house? Previously on The Toll, Poison, Control.
Killing first husband, maybe making the second husband go crazy, looking for the third.
I've had testimony from more people who have come to this house and walked away very, very ill.
She stroked my hair with her right hand as she was leaning over me, and she said, I know you're a fighter, but you're not going to win this one.
He just seemed unhappy or on edge.
So where's your salt, Mom? Like it was a big deal.
It's tragic, really.
I don't believe in coincidences.
We all have a story.
Nobody was able to make it because everybody was sick.
A dark secret wrapped in emptiness and regret.
Within a year, her entire nuclear family died.
You know.
Tons and tons of chemicals.
The Toll. I'm Nancy Simpson.
I'm an award-winning journalist who has spent decades chasing stories and investigating cases across the Ozarks.
Bruce, Jeannie's husband, number 3, dies. After losing his leg, his heart, and after all that, he dies in the most unusual way. The end of his life will be the end of this story. Because to understand how weird, irrational, and calculated Jeannie appeared to so many at the end of Bruce's life, I have to examine all the sicknesses and deaths that got us here. So we'll work our way back before Bruce died, before the salt shakers, the Easter candy that tested positive for arsenic, and back before Jeanette realized she had something very disturbing in common with Bruce. The same shade of gray. Their skin. It was the same shade of gray. As I scour emails, documents, and thumb through timelines, I see there was so much sickness. I want to stress, though, that the focus from authorities was mainly on the husbands. And as I started to dig, I get it. There's so much. And if you look at one death in a silo and then another death as a standalone, you have to take the path of least resistance when it comes to logic. That people are diagnosed with cancer every day, or people get diagnosed with MS every day. But when you create a nearly 200-page timeline of a person's life, like I have, a person who admits to being surrounded by people who stay sick and die, you start to find patterns. And as I work to get to the truth, I see some patterns emerge very quickly. The timeline, complete with embedded documents, referenced with corresponding emails, pictures, and newspaper clippings, it's something local authorities and the FBI needed to be able to see the entire picture. It took me 3 years to compile, and every once in a while I still add to it. But I have it. I've done the work. Early 2003, Jeanette tells me she called her Uncle Jim, her mother's only sibling, as she told him Bruce was very sick and was concerned her mother was to blame. Now, you have to understand that Jim was a physician. He warned Jeanette that that was a huge accusation and said maybe Jeannie was just a bad cook. Maybe there's another explanation. Jeanette confronted her sister, Chris, after the holidays.
I asked Chris after that, I said, whoa, what's all that throwing up? And she goes, oh, I just tell the kids to be careful of what they eat over there. So, and I don't actually remember which Christmas it was. I asked her that because, like I said, people were throwing up all the time.
David, Bruce's son, tells me they heard that from Jeannie herself more than once.
Jeannie making jokes about, oh, I must just be a bad cook because people keep getting sick.
Jeanette was also concerned about her mother's prescription drug use. Jeanette says her mother had always taken harsh prescription pills. Even as a child, Jeanette remembers her mother always on something. Opioids were on the list. She tells me she took a picture of those many pill bottles and sent it to her uncle, who lived in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Shortly after this, Jeanette has her third baby. Bruce, well, he's been very sick. Jeanette and David both told me this story.
His comment to us, to me directly, and to us, and to everyone that would listen, you don't want to be with Jeannie if you're having an emergency. And then she'd laugh and he'd laugh. It was her little routine to say this. I was having a heart attack in the car, and I said, call 911. And she pulled the car over and stared at me. So they thought that was pretty funny. And she said, I just freeze in an emergency. So I guess he thought that was cute. I don't know.
Say, yeah, you better hope you're not in the car with her or needing help with her because she's going to freeze and not help you out or not do anything to help you.
Then Bruce died. Not forever, but Jeanette says that day, obviously, was very rough.
She goes, get a sitter for your kids. Come to the hospital. Bruce is, I think she even said dead on the table, but that he was about to die on the table and his heart had stopped. And she told other people that he had died on the table, I guess, twice. Her concern was different than I expected. She said, if he dies, then I get this much money and this and that happens financially for me. If he lives, then I get this much, that much, etc. And she kept spinning out about it all day. Well, if he lives, then this much money, and if he dies... And I went and got a nurse to intervene. I said, she's having a breakdown. Can somebody please come talk to her? She's just repeating herself and going on. And I thought, no sane person would be talking about money right now when her husband's dying. So somebody needs to intervene.
Did she say that on the phone about the money? And then again when you got
And in person, and 5-6 times that day. Just, it was the main focus of her day was, oh, okay, if he lives... And then if he dies, it's like she was in a debate with herself about what was the best outcome.
Doctors revived Bruce, and then he became a pioneer in the medical field with an artificial heart previously reserved for transplant patients. There are a couple of write-ups I found in the Utah paper, the Herald Journal. One title, Hyde Park resident Bruce Fulford getting a new heart. This part, from the article, it caught my eye. After moving to Cache County 3 years ago from Michigan to get married, he started seeing a cardiologist and taking medication to help his condition. For a time, he actually felt better. But then in March, he started feeling sick again, and no one could pin down what was ailing him. It's one of the patterns I keep seeing. Baffled doctors. It's 2004. Jeanette's Uncle Jim was worried that Jeannie had not been to Missouri to visit their parents for 5 years. Jeannie had been busy tending to Bruce.
And I said, well, she won't leave Bruce's side because he's so sick. And he goes, then watch him for her, do something, but you've got to get her to come see her parents. This is not okay.
Jeanette says when she told her mom Uncle Jim's message, Jeannie was mad. She didn't like being told what to do. Non-negotiable, he said. It's been too long. Well, their father was in a nursing home and their mother was living alone in LaBelle, Missouri. It's a map dot in the northern part of the state. There was a time before when Jeannie left to help with some kind of emergency in Missouri, leaving Bruce behind. It sticks out in Jeanette's mind.
I bet my husband, I said, I'll bet you money that he's going to stop throwing up when she goes to Missouri. And sure enough, he stopped throwing up for that entire time she was gone. When she came back, I was up there to hand off whatever I was handing off. And they were both standing in front of me. And I remember looking at them and I said, isn't that weird, Mom? He didn't throw up at all while you were gone. And she goes, oh, I know. We've decided that my personality makes him nervous. And then he goes, yeah, that's it. And they just laughed it off. Like he was throwing up because her personality made him nervous or something. I don't know.
But he didn't question anything.
No, he didn't know. Why would you think your wife's poisoning you, right?
This time, Bruce needed much more help while Jeannie was gone. Jeanette and others did take shifts taking care of him. Here's an excerpt from Jeannie's history papers. Mom didn't work long after I was born, and she had quit work outside the home and started taking in sewing by the time Jim was born when I was 5. I think I was pretty disappointed because I wanted someone to play with, and he seemed pretty inadequate. There was a peacefulness about not having television, and just as my mom read to me, I read to Jim. He must have enjoyed it because we occupied hundreds of hours over the next few years that way. August 2004, Uncle Jim and his wife, Carol, also a doctor in Oklahoma, headed off for Utah. Jim was a 52-year-old medical doctor. Jeanette does not know what private conversation Jim had with his sister, Jeannie. What Jeanette does know is that his health took a dive immediately as he was leaving Utah.
Something was unusual. I don't know if it's that thing in the air when you know that something's wrong, but I remember he said, follow us wherever until we know for sure how to get to Wendover, or we'll follow you or something. And as I was driving, I didn't want to stop. I wanted to just keep going with them. And we stopped at a gas station in Tooele, and he got out and he made this little sniff noise and he goes, ooh, what's that in the air? And I said, it's Kennecott. There's a chemical thing. And he goes, ooh. And then it was like time stood still, and I just didn't want to let him go. And he left, and that was the last time I saw him. But yeah, something was different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He called me when he got back to Oklahoma, and he said, well, we made it, but I just need to talk to you about what I think's going on with your health. And he said, I think that you and I might have the same things going on. He goes, because when I left Utah, I couldn't see. So he said that he had to have my aunt drive because it looked like it was raining or something, and he just couldn't visualize. And so he pulled over and let my aunt drive. And he said, and the headaches, the splitting headaches, he goes, my head hurts so bad. And he goes, I'm thinking that whatever's going on with me is what's wrong with you. And then in the next couple of days, he got some tests done, and come to find out he had plaques all over his brain. So he told me that he had no idea. Maybe he'd been living with this for a while, but there was just plaques everywhere. And then, I don't know if it was a week or two, maybe 3 weeks later, he came home and just fell over on the floor, turned white as a sheet and fell over in Oklahoma. And so he was in the hospital for a while, but he ended up just passing away. So he died. Yeah.
An aneurysm, that was the final determination. And during this time, doctors found a tumor on his kidney. Private Detective Mark Nozak holds nothing back as he interrogates Jeanne.
I do believe I know what happened with Jim. Jim came here and Jim became a threat because Jim started asking you some hard questions. Jim came here and started asking you some hard questions, and you perceived him as a threat. Jim left here and died. Jim left here and died. I've talked to Carol, and Carol says, I don't think Jeanne killed Jim. Because he had another condition. I said, I talked to the doctors. I says, poisoning can exacerbate that other condition and further it along dramatically fast. I said, trust me, he may have had another condition, but he probably died as a result of what Jeanne gave him. Probably. That's my point. That's my point is I am certain that we will put together a number of cases.
Amazing.
I apologize. I don't try and be amazing. I'm just a crusty old cop, a private detective.
Totally amazing.
Mark Nozak was in her house for a good hour, and during exchanges like that, she never once raised her voice, outright called bullshit, or threw him out. It's just an observation, but another pattern. Remember, we're going backwards in this timeline. Jeanette not clued in yet on what may be going on around her. A memory of her and her sister getting their stomachs pumped when they were little. Well, Jeanne, the mom's story around that is that the girls got into a bottle of pills and one of them saying, "But Mommy, we shared." And there's the time Jeanette headed off to her mission in Argentina during college, her mother wiping out her savings while she was away. A care package from Jeanne arrived, and Jeanette got so sick it forced her to come home. Her lifelong friend Rayanne, she remembers.
She was sick for probably 4 or 5 months. It took her 6 to 9 months to recover.
Jeanette says she was always such an athletic child, very competitive and healthy, until she wasn't. It came in spurts, stomach aches, tests, and then she'd get better. Back to Uncle Jim. His body was cremated and the FBI dragged their feet on gathering his ashes for testing. I guess you have like 2 years or so to test ashes for poison. On our interview day, Jeanette and I spent 7 hours going through her life story. It was a long day. For the most part, she was strong and steady. But here, talking about Uncle Jim, it really got to her.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, and I miss him, and I feel guilty that I got him involved. I don't know what happened. I still didn't know what happened right then, but I just thought, my uncle just died out of nowhere. What happened? So, yeah, it was quite devastating to me. Mm-hmm. And it still is, yeah.
And you felt if you hadn't gotten him involved, he'd be fine?
I do feel like that, yeah. Yeah.
From Jeanne's writings, Jim and I entertained ourselves with great hide-and-seek games, cops and robbers on bicycles, and a front yard baseball diamond. Our house was the gathering place for the neighborhood. Mom said that after Jim went to college, it dawned on her one day that home plate had finally grassed over, and she knew that she finally had an empty nest. Jeanette says there was barely a Jim without her Aunt Carol by his side. At 5 years old, Carol went up to Jim and Jeanne's mother and said, "I'm gonna marry Jimmy Howard someday." And she did. The couple went from kindergarten through medical school together and raised a family. Jeanette says Aunt Carol was beyond devastated by Jim's death. She started drinking and made a series of bad decisions. There was a whirlwind brewing. Jeanette says Grandma Doris Howard, Jeannie and Jim's mother, then became very sick. We're talking 3 weeks after Jim's passing. Jeannie stayed with her mother through the funeral and then stayed with her some more afterward, getting the executorship in her name. Jeanette says you have to understand that her grandma was very healthy and active, carrying 2 bags of groceries and walking to the nursing home every day, visiting her husband, Grandpa Howard.
It just went so fast, and I couldn't understand it, why she was throwing up. I still don't understand. I don't know. But I wonder if the sugar bowl, the salt, any of that stuff that was just normal for her right there, I don't know what happened, but I think it's unusual for her to be crippling up, throwing up. And if you have cancer, I don't know of anybody that the first sign of your cancer is that you're throwing up nonstop. Maybe that happens, but it's a pattern. I realize that things happen normally, and I don't know where to draw the line, and everything is her fault and nothing's her fault. But I'm saying this was weird. This was very odd.
Aunt Carol found Grandma Howard, her mother-in-law, in really bad shape. No time to grieve Uncle Jim's passing. There was now a new crisis to focus on. Grandma Doris Howard was admitted into the hospital. I have the report, January 9th, 2004, 77-year-old, abdominal pain with nausea and vomiting brown liquid that looks like stool. 5 weeks after Uncle Jim died, Grandma Howard was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a cancer of the plasma cells, and she couldn't stop vomiting. Jeanette says her mother was telling everyone Grandma Howard wasn't taking visitors and couldn't physically answer the phone. Aunt Carol told Jeanette that wasn't true.
So I said, I'll go. And so my mom called me up and said, you are not going. This is my mother. And also, I talked with your grandmother and she's embarrassed by her illness. She cannot reach her arm out to the phone. She's so weak. Don't call her. She told all the kids, do not call your grandmother. She can't reach the phone, and she does not want anyone to come out. She's very embarrassed by her illness and doesn't want anyone there.
Jeanette says it just seems like her grandma deteriorated so quickly with her time alone with Jeannie.
And I personally hold her responsible for all the lies and the fact that my grandmother said the hardest part of my illness is when that first week when I was so scared and nobody came and nobody called.
Jeanette is full of regrets, this being one of them.
Oh, this is just stuff that makes me sick. Because 2004 is when he said, I demand she go see her family. You realize that within a year, her entire nuclear family died.
Jeanette says little stories throughout her growing up about her Grandma Howard started resurfacing, and she started looking at them through a different lens.
Yeah, she had throughout, like since I was 8 or 9, then things would just pop up with her. Like, she would just fall down. And I thought maybe that's why I had something wrong. But at one point when I was younger, she fell down into a ball and then couldn't remember who she was for a week. I had talked with the doctors about that. I'm like, is this a weird migraine? You know, as I got older. And they said, no, that's nothing like a migraine. That's something different. And when I was in the hospital, I asked her about that as she was dying. And she said, oh gosh, they kept making me go see psychologists and all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, I had a headache. I fell down. I didn't remember who I was for a week. That's all there is to it. But she had little blackouts like that since I remembered.
Would your mom have had access to her food and drink at that time?
Oh, absolutely. They were very close and they saw him all the time. LaBelle was, 40-minute drive, 30-minute drive from where we were. We were up there a lot.
Did she like her mom? Did she get along with her?
Yeah, I believe she loved her mom. I know she loved her father very much. She said her mother was a little more, she was a better adult parent than she was as when I was younger. But everybody loved my grandma and grandpa.
As I look through her medical records, I see Grandma Howard's spell so many years ago was mentioned here. Quote, she did admit to having some loss of consciousness secondary to severe migraine headaches, for which she was hospitalized for a long time ago. Now, Jeanette says she remembers when her grandma blacked out and blanked out, even forgetting her own name. She was 8, and while visiting her in the hospital, Jeanette was the only one Grandma Howard could remember, so her visits were special. She says that's why she remembers the incident so clearly. Jeanette says there was a lot of turmoil around that time, too. A couple of homes caught fire, homes belonging to relatives. So it sticks out because so much was happening. I scoured through old newspapers to see if I could find word that Grandma Howard was in the hospital, but no luck. But Jeanette says she believes it was Grandma who provided that information to the local paper, and she wouldn't have sent something in like that on herself. Early 2005, Grandma Howard looked to be headed home from the hospital. Diagnosed with blood cancer, but she was starting to feel a little better. Jeannie called Jeanette and asked her for a favor.
She said, oh my gosh, if she goes back to the house, she's going to see that I took all her journals. Can you please take these back with you and put them on the middle shelf in her closet and blah, blah, blah. There were a lot of journals. And I'm never one to open people's mail or read, so I didn't open them. I took them all back and I put them all in the house for her. Later, my grandmother had written me a book. It was called her Dear Jeanette book. And my mother told everyone that was her journal. And so they typed it up and they took all the Dear Jeanette off the top and said, well, here's Grandma's journal. And they published it out to the family. And I said, where's all her other journals? And everyone said I was crazy. There weren't any other journals. Which, ironically, on the night before I turned 50, and I told you it's the first time I'd heard from her, first time she'd called me in 12 years, she said, you know, I have something that might be of interest to you in my garage. If you're ever inclined. I have a bunch of your grandma's journals, if you'd be interested. And I just went, whatever. I already knew they existed, but she had lied to everybody because she didn't want them to have it. And now here she was on a private phone call with me all these years later going, you know, you might want these. These might be interesting to you. So she teased me with it. I didn't bite it all. I wasn't giving her my address. She goes, where would I send them? I wasn't going to give her my address.
6 weeks after Grandma Howard was moved into assisted living, Bruce, husband number 3, was having his leg amputated. His blood was not circulating down to his feet. As he lay in the hospital bed, the nurse was working on him.
She was doing some medical procedure. It was very unexpected that sheet went back, and it wasn't wrapped or anything. It was just his leg, just a stump. And I had to back out of the room gracefully, and I went out in the hallway and just started bawling. My mother followed me because apparently Bruce had said, go after her. I didn't storm out. I backed out. When she came out, she said, so how are you feeling? And she was in my soul. I felt like she was absorbing everything that was going on with me. She was fine. And I said, this is not about me. This is not about you or how I feel. This man just lost his leg and it's horrifying to me. And I need to get myself together for a minute. And I need to get a drink and I need to get myself together and come in. And we need to be there for him. It's about him. I don't want anyone asking how I feel. This is about him. She was fine.
Jeanette says she believes this was another time her mother's mask came off, revealing another person.
The way she stared at me, it was a memorable, deep, in my mind stare. When I came back after getting a drink, she was standing by his bedside. He had his arm around her, and she was fake weeping. And he said, come here, come here, come here. And he was motioning for me to come in. And he said, my 2 girls, he goes, tears are a beautiful thing. You never need to hide them. And I don't want my 2 best girls out in the hallway crying over me. Your mother told me how you 2 were out there sobbing and consoling each other. Let's just do it in here together. And I looked at her, and that was not what happened, and it was exactly the opposite. We had a man who had just lost his leg, and he was consoling us, and it was over a story that was untrue. It was like, she said she told him she was crying. I didn't see her crying, but I guess he thought she was crying. But she was faking something.
Did you feel in the hallway she was studying you?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
I don't think I've ever had that happen to me in my life before, but she went past my eyes and she was just in there studying like I was a foreign animal or something, like trying to absorb how I felt and take it on as her own. Or, this is interesting. Why don't I act like that? I don't know what she was doing, but it was a very obvious play that she was putting on in front of him, and she was an actress, and she took my role.
At the same time, in early 2005, Jeanne announced at the hospital that her mother was going to die that night and that she needed to go to Missouri. Jeanette called Aunt Carol, who confirmed this was not true. Let her go, Carol told Jeanette. Jeanette, with 3 kids and battling illness herself, had been going back and forth from Utah to Missouri.
I said, I will drive you to the airport, but I'm going to have to take shifts with you after. I can't go all the way to Missouri with you. So I drove her started going to the airport, and she goes, oh, stop off at Macy's or Dillard's or something at the mall. I need to get myself a really nice funeral suit. And so she came out and she was all happy and cheery and completely different than the very woeful person at Bruce's bedside. And she was excited and she was going to Missouri. So I took her to the airport and she left.
Jeanette's grandma died on Easter Sunday, the day before her birthday. Jeanne was there with her. Jeanette did not go to the funeral.
Because when I was visiting my grandma a whole bunch, she said, please do not come to my funeral. Funerals are for the living. Just keep coming and visiting me. So I took a lot of shifts. My siblings did not take these shifts, but I went and sat by her side many times before she died.
Jeanette says she had no regrets on that decision.
My mom reported back. Everyone was saying what a great speech I gave, and oh, you wouldn't believe how many people were there. It was such a beautiful funeral. We just had such a great, it was like a party. I couldn't go to that.
Jeanette says that was the complaint from Aunt Carol at Uncle Jim's funeral, that Jeanne was treating her brother's service like a party, laughing, happy. And Jeanne had told everyone Jeanette was too sick to attend Uncle Jim's funeral. It upset Aunt Carol, who called Jeanette saying she needed to be there. Jeanette wondered why her mom made her too sick to attend, but well enough to travel several states to take shifts with Grandma. I have to tell you, this part in the timeline was a bear. There was so much death and sickness, just so much going on. Jeanette said her head was spinning, and I totally see why. Jeanette saw this movie quote and says she felt it to her core. It was written by Charles Addams, the man who created the Addams Family. He breathed life into the lines through Morticia. Normal is an illusion. What is normal for the spider is chaos to the fly. When Jeanette took me to the cemetery to visit her grandma's grave, the first thing I noticed was that the middle name on her tombstone was Jeanne. But it was Jeanne, right? So we poured through documents to see what we could find. There are a couple of times in the paper they write Doris Jeanne, extra N, extra E, but many, many with Jeanne. And in all fairness, the paper got a few names wrong from time to time. And Jeanne was in the paper a lot with her mom, so that could be an easy answer. Simple mix-up. Then there was another Doris Jeanne, Doris's sister-in-law. Lived right next door. Yep, confusing. In her history papers, Jeanne writes about the two Dorises. It says, fortunately, Bob, Lewis's brother, married Doris Jeanne White. She was a widow whose first husband was killed in a pedestrian accident in Edina, Missouri. Imagine having two Doris Jean Howards living across the street from each other in the little town of LaBelle. Jean there, it's spelled Jean. Marriage certificate from 1943, Jean. Household members and registries, handwritten and typed, all of them are Jean. Her middle name and her son's obit, Jean. And her father's obit, same, Jean. A handwritten list, federal census from the National Archives, Jean. The online birth registration website says Jeannie for a middle name. More Jeans than Jeannies. I just found this weird. Jeanette's sleep business in the spring of 2005 was booming. The Sleep Institute of Utah, a medical clinic for patients with sleep disorders, was bringing in millions, and Jeannie was pushing her daughter to take out Keyman insurance.
I felt like I had a little angel on my shoulder, and it was bringing in $3 million, $3.5 million a year. And I had hired my brother and my sister. I mean, I worked hard. I was not as sick as they kept saying. I was able to run a business, and I had many employees, and I did a good job. Well, she called up and said, you need a Keyman insurance policy on you, because if something happens, you need enough money in that company to keep cash flowing if you go down. And I'm like, Keyman? She goes, look it up. And she goes, you need $1 million on you for your family and $1 million on you for the company. And I said, I'll look into it. And then she kept calling about it.
Right before that, Jeanette says her mom called her wanting some cash. What was going on with Jeannie and Bruce that they'd asked Jeanette for $50,000? She knew Bruce was worth millions.
She was saying, did you get the policy? Did you get the policy? And she was calling me on a regular basis that summer going, did you get the policy? I did not relate it to them needing the $50,000. I do now. But when I said, fine, yes, I got it. Now, I had called and looked into it, but I hadn't put it in place yet, and I didn't have it. I didn't really understand at the time when I was called into the FBI. I didn't understand some of that significance. I see it now.
Bruce gets his second artificial heart. From what I can piece together, I believe he had some kind of infection that got into the machine. Jeanette's operations manager at the sleep business got a call from Jeannie saying Jeanette was very ill and was going to die, not to ask her about it, but to help her get her affairs in order. Jeanette confronted her mother about it later during that recorded call.
Well, either she misunderstood me or you misunderstood her, one or the other, because I did tell her that you were sick. I didn't tell her that she had MS because, of course, I still don't know that. And I said she always pushes herself, and she really shouldn't so much. And I really would like to take as much stress off of her as possible, and I want to get this nanny hired for her. And I'd like for you to help me out with that.
Jeanette's MS diagnosis had already been squashed by the Mayo Clinic at this point, and Jeanette was growing concerned that this was the third person Jeannie told this to, that Jeanette was gonna die. Then the Halloween candy comes. The candy, looking back now, Jeanette realizes made her family sick. And Jeanette says after that, there was the soup.
I myself never liked to be sick around my mother at all because it would feed into her narrative. But she had said, you need to try this soup. You've got to try this soup. I made it for Bruce. It's the best soup. And I said, I'm really fine. I'm really fine. She actually came up with the bowl to my chin and the spoon and said, you must try the soup. So she's feeding me soup while I'm on this couch. And as I was sitting there, I got extremely ill. And I rolled over on my side on this couch, and I was in crippling pain. Like, there's no way I could have gotten up to walk downstairs. It was crippling pain. And Bruce looked over at me and he goes, why are you lying like that? And I go, I'm fine. He goes, what's wrong with you? And I go, my stomach just hurts. That's all. And he goes, what? Jeannie, take her to the emergency room. And she was like, what? And my mom started ignoring me about it. And I said, I'm fine. I don't need, my stomach just hurts. That's all. And he said, can you get up? And I said, no, it hurts too much. And I was probably in tears. And he stood up and he said, if you don't take her to the emergency room right now, I'm divorcing you. And he went down the hallway. And then she goes, oh, fine. Come on, let's go to the emergency room. So I managed to make it to the car.
It was there, in the emergency room. Something happened.
When I got to the Logan Regional Hospital, then we sat down in the waiting room, and there were some magazines there. And so I picked one up and started reading it. And she looked over my shoulder and she goes, what are you reading? And she grabbed it out of my, I wouldn't say grab. She slid it out of my hands. And I said, what did you just take my magazine for? And she said, oh, that's sick stuff. That's sick stuff. Don't read about that. And as she pulled it out of my hands, I fixed on what the article was about, because she had never, ever taken anything out of my hands that I was reading before. She's an English major. She promotes reading. And it said Munchausen by proxy. And I said, Munchausen by proxy? And she said, it's sick stuff. Don't read it. It's just, and I go, what is it? And she said, oh, it's where mothers hurt their babies or something. It's just, so I made a mental note of it just to look at it, because I didn't understand what her emotional attachment was to that article. She'd never audited my reading, ever edited anything. It's just always promoted education.
And once they were in the room with the doctor,
she started telling the doctor that I had had multiple sclerosis. I'd been sick my whole life. I had bands all over in my spinal tap, and I had plaques all over my brain, and that this was quite usual for me. And I literally didn't say a word. I just sat there. I didn't look at the doctor. I was sitting there looking at her with this what in the world look on my face. And when he left, I looked at her and I go, what in the world was that? And she goes, oh, you know that that's true. And I said, that is not true. I have 0 bands on my spinal tap. I have no plaques on my brain. I've had 11 MRIs to prove it. I've been to the Mayo Clinic and they cleared me of any illnesses. And you need to stop telling everyone that I'm sick. I'm not sick. And she just placated me. And when he came back, then they had put on my diagnosis as colitis or something like that. Because I'd said I probably got food poisoned. It felt like food poisoning. It was extremely sharp pains. It's gone away. And she covered it all up and I left. That was it. They did no tests. They just decided it was par for the course with me.
After the Halloween candy, after the Easter candy, there must have been whispers that Jeanette was the real poisoner. In an email I found, Jeanne appears to come to her defense. She writes, I'd like to say a few more words about our conversations about Munchausen's. I didn't really know what it was, had only heard of it once long ago on a TV show, and had it only vaguely explained to me by the deputy. I mentioned it to Carol, who told me a little more about it, although she didn't know much either. And we both dismissed the idea of you having this as completely false. I never at that time or since could imagine in my wildest thoughts that you would ever take even the smallest chance of harming any of your children. You have always been a protective mother. I find that a wonderful trait in you, and it makes me feel very secure about my grandchildren. There's also emails I found from Jeanette to authorities about Jeanne accusing Jeanette of poisoning the candy. Jeanette works on her own to dispel any notion of it. There's a letter in the mix dated April 6, 2006, the same time as the recorded phone call conversation. It's from Jeanne to a neurologist Jeanette had on her payroll at the Sleep Institute of Utah. I'll call him Dr. G. He's still practicing. Jeanette, testing her mom, told her she was going to go see Dr. G for some neurological symptoms and get tested for pesticides. Jeanne wasn't supportive of this move. Then this letter after the recorded phone call. The letter in part says, I'm Jeanette Robbins' mother, and that's how it starts. Alarmed about her mental condition, didn't want to discuss this with you on the phone, increasingly concerned with her over the past several months, but the conversation with her 2 days ago is the reason I'm writing. She asked me if I poisoned her father, who dropped dead while jogging in 1992. Asked me if I had anything to do with my second husband's problems. Jeanette has suggested that I'm responsible for her health problems by possibly poisoning her. She even referred to a time at Thanksgiving when I switched salt shakers while cooking. Reading this over, I can see that you might have some suspicions about me too. But I assure you that other than having rather startling experiences with husbands, I am completely innocent. In the letter, Jeannie touches on Jeanette's possible marital problems, says Jeanette has been obsessing over her dad and feels he may have sexually abused her when she was young. She also seems to find herself around people who are plotting against her. She goes on to say her father's father was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Jeanette says this is not true, and that Jeanette's dad suffered from depression. And then she gives her phone number, wondering if there's some tests that can be done. I asked Jeanette how she got this letter. She had a key to her mom's house, given to her by her mom. Jeanette went in, looked around, and found this letter. I asked if Dr. G was mailed a copy. She says that she asked him about it, but he didn't say and blew it off. He worked closely with Jeanette. He wasn't going to play. Oh, and while in her house, Jeanette checked for the salt shakers, the containers, and they were gone. I asked. Years later, Jeanette asks her mom about this letter in an email, and Jeannie replies, "Dear Jeanette, I'm sorry that you have been hurt by unjust accusations. I did talk to a few people about what my concerns were about your stability. I sincerely do not remember ever using the word crazy or saying anything about you being institutionalized. If I ever did, I am truly sorry for the false accusation. I remember the letter to Dr. G, but a careful reading of it will show mainly my concern. I did think something had to be wrong with you, however. I was being accused of killing people. I had been accused of trying to poison you by putting something in your food through the salt shaker." I don't have a lot of emails where Jeanette is calling out her mom for Jim's death or her grandma's death, and I asked her why. Jeanette wrote to me, "From March to the next January 2006 is when I was getting very sick, plus in mourning. I don't think I was directly confronting her on things at the time. I didn't relate Grandma or Uncle Jim's death or illnesses to her whatsoever. I was just so upset at the lies and manipulations. I called Mark, the private investigator, in January of 2006, and she had me alienated from everyone by April. I was still trying to grasp what was going on with my daughter, and Mark, the private investigator, told me to focus on the husbands." Next time on The Toll. Poison control.
And Dad turned around and said her last husband died under suspicious circumstances.
The initial event was toxicological in nature.
Because Roy did not go ahead and die right away, I suppose that it's probably more probable that his dementia was a different type.
I point by point verified with her via email over time, using time as my weapon.
He just laughed and laughed and laughed. He said that was a fat check.
Thank you for listening. The Toll Podcast, Season 2, Poison Control, is a production of The Toll, LLC. Creator, investigator, host, and audio producer, me, Nancy Simpson. Executive producer, Pamela Shelby. Original intro and recording by Jay Lashley. Special thanks to Shelby Powers for assisting with web design and original brand identity. Music by Fesleyan Studios. Reproduction or any part of this broadcast without the express permission of The Toll, LLC is prohibited. Get updates at our website, thetollpodcast.com.